for maybe. All right, welcome everyone to the Governance Hour. My name is Nicolas Czerny. I'm the governance lead at the Cardano Foundation. And before we dive in, I want to ask you really quickly if you could subscribe, like, or leave a comment with your questions to this live stream. This helps to gain visibility and also that more people can learn about what we're discussing today. And today, we will actually learn quite a bit. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce Dr. Nick Schaub here on this live stream. And today we'll dive into the DeFi stablecoin liquidity budget, treasury withdrawal, this whole initiative, and try to get an understanding of why it's so important for Cardano. Is it important for Cardano? But before we dive into these details, welcome, Nick. Maybe you want to say a few words about yourself and how did you discover Cardano? Since when are you in Cardano?
Yeah, sure. So, so thank you for having me. So my name's Dr. Nick Schaub. I think most people know me on Twitter and Discord as Elder Millennial. I've probably been on Cardano for about 3 or 4 years now. I've kind of been in and out of the crypto space, not so much as a developer, since like the Bitcoin days, pretty early on, like even before Ethereum started up. As I was making some transitions, I was starting to look for, I knew that a lot of new crypto chains had kind of started up. So I started taking a look around. And as I was getting into kind of more of my kind of like lines of research for what I do for my day job, I was looking at something that, maybe I could try to do something with AI and crypto. And as I was looking at things, Cardano just kind of seemed like the most structurally sound chain that was out there. So that was the main reason that was the main thing that had kind of attracted me to it. And then since then, I've been kind of doing a bunch of work on Cardano. So I think most people are probably familiar with SteelSwap. So I'm the co-founder of SteelSwap. It's a DEX aggregator. More recently, I think maybe some people have been following some of the Vibe node stuff that I've been doing with AI and trying to Vibe code a Cardano node. Most importantly, and the reason why we're here today is that I'm running an initiative to try and help increase the depth of liquidity in the Cardano ecosystem, because this is one of the, in spite of all of the other things that I might be doing on Cardano, this is one of what I see is kind of the weaknesses of Cardano in terms of trying to make it more sustainable. So we can jump more into that here.
Yeah, that's perfect. I mean, it's also great to hear you're from the AI space and you were, I think, in AI before it was cool. So this is
for 10 years. Yep.
That's amazing. And regarding the DeFi liquidity and the proposal, of course, I mean, I think you've been working on that now for more than a year, right? I know it started, I think when it started, you were even still anonymous. And
yeah. So when I first started on it, so I live in the United States, and at the time, when I first came onto Cardano and started to be kind of more of a public figure on Cardano, the crypto space in the United States was on a much shakier footing. So I made the decision to try and keep kind of like my professional life and my crypto life separate. So when I first started doing this, I realized that, this could be one of the potential issues in terms of trying to make this thing move. So I think it was like last January or February, which is when I started first circulating the first draft of this. It's been quite a long road. I remember going from, just being some anonymous crypto person that people would follow, sometimes had some intelligent things to say, to trying to, really try to push this forward by letting people know who I am. I actually am serious about this. I'm not just going to take, ADA and run with it, and yeah, so that's kind of where this has been, where it started and kind of where it's been going.
That's super interesting. I mean, one of the things I think that's important to understand when we start to talk about the proposal is like, what was the pain point that led to it, right? You've been heavily involved in Cardano even before this initiative and with everything that you're doing with Steel Swap. But this pain point around liquidity, maybe before we delve into that, you could also share for those people in the audience that are not DeFi degenerates or DeFi traders that really know what is liquidity, what are we even talking about here, and why is that such a big deal?
Yeah, sure. So, so what is liquidity? So liquidity, I mean, one of the main reasons why the value cell of crypto, or one of the value cells of crypto, is that it's a decentralized financial system, right? And what we have on Cardano is we have a bunch of different types of protocols that mirror very similar things that we see in traditional financial markets. So there's like lending protocols, there's exchanges which mimic something that looks like a stock market, even though I'm not entirely sold that native tokens are exactly stocks. However, a lot of the trading activity actually mimics a lot of that. Now, one of the things that we know, not just in the crypto space, but even in the traditional space, is that in order for these markets to run smoothly, you have to have a lot of liquidity, meaning like if you want to go and buy and sell stock, there has to be enough people in the market trying to buy and sell stock in order for it to be a smooth transaction. If you don't, what ends up happening is if you say, okay, I want to buy $1,000 of Tesla as an example, there's only 3 people that you can negotiate with to buy and sell Tesla stock with. That's not necessarily going to be a very good representation of what the Tesla stock is, right? Something very similar happens in crypto markets, right? And I think most people are familiar with this, right? So like you go and you take, you have, let's say 100,000 ADA, you want to go and buy, like you just want to convert it to stable coins because you're looking at the market and you say, well, I want to get away from some of this volatility. Just the act of going to one of these decentralized exchanges and trying to exchange it for a stable coin is kind of like a safe haven from volatility. It's really challenging to do right at the moment just because there isn't enough liquidity participating in the market. So what ends up happening is that when you go to buy or sell things on a lot of these exchanges, you end up paying a lot more, not just in the fees, but there's also a cost to like the size of the trades that you're making, right? And again, this is very similar to traditional markets where if you only have 2 or 3 people that you're going to be trading with, there's a good chance you're going to be buying stocks at a much higher level or at a much higher price than what you normally would. And if you're selling them, you're probably selling them at a much lower price than what you really deserve to get. So that's kind of the basic explanation of like what is liquidity and kind of why do we need it in our markets.
It's great, right? To level set everyone, and then when we look at Cardano, right? We have a DeFi ecosystem, we have DEXs, we have lending protocols, right? Great builders that run these projects. But the problem that you alluded to is that there is only so much liquidity in these different pairs, right? And one of the things I think that I've noticed also last year, if I remember it correctly, it was the Amaro team with their client that they're building, the Rust client for Cardano, where they have experienced really high slippage on their exchange, on their trades. So this is one of the things, right, that you want to address in your proposal, and maybe now would be a good time to sort of explain the high level of what you are actually asking the community for, or what you want to do, because I think,
Yeah. So exactly. So yeah, as you were saying, I mean, there's ways of being able to mitigate some of these issues in terms of like when you have low liquidity systems, what you can do is instead of trying to buy or sell right now, you can just put out an open order and say, okay, whoever wants to buy it at this price can buy it, right? And that's effectively what the Amaru team did with at least a portion of what it was that they were doing, right? Where they put out a bunch of limit orders on the system, and they just kind of waited until the market like crossed a price threshold in order to convert what they were doing. So that's kind of one strategy of doing it. Now, one of the problems with doing that kind of stuff is that you have to kind of like hope that, you know, that price threshold is going to be met before the market moves in the opposite direction, right? So there's quite a bit of risk involved in that. So one of the ways that I'm kind of hoping to mitigate some of these kind of risks, which allows us to support businesses like, you know, the Amaru team when they do get a bunch of ADA, is to try and use funds from the treasury to put it out into the DeFi ecosystem in Cardano. And this has a bunch of advantages, right? So one of the advantages is that it allows businesses that come to and operate on Cardano to actually do business, right? So if they actually have funds and they need to do some kind of transactions to convert it into one asset or another, it's a much smoother process. They don't have to rely so much on, you know, hoping that they're able to get the price that they want by using like limit orders or like some kind of time average trading strategy. They can just go directly to the DEX and make the trade, and then they have everything that they need. Now, so the idea behind the proposal is to take 50 million ADA from the treasury and put it into very specific pairs on Cardano to increase the particular pairs that we believe that are going to have the most usage, things that are maybe the most attractive for businesses to come here and use. So very specifically, instead of just kind of like flooding the system or any token that wants to have access to some of this liquidity, we're very narrowly scoping this to only stable coins or any kind of a protocol that needs to pair ADA with stable coins. And it's exactly for the use case that you were just mentioning. So there's a business here, they have a withdrawal from the treasury. They get that in ADA. One of the things that they can do is they, you know, just like the Amaru team said was, okay, ADA's at 80 cents. We don't know if it's going to go down. If it goes up, I mean, obviously it would be better for us to hold on to it, but we have a business to run. We need to make sure that we're able to pay our people. So we're going to convert this to dollars now. That way we don't have that downside risk. So what this allows us to do is by increasing the liquidity on these ADA stablecoin pairs, that allows businesses that are doing things in the treasury to convert this into dollars to try and to make sure that they can actually run their business on Cardano. So that's, okay. So there's a couple of things here. So in the proposal, we're one of the things that we're doing is we're not just trying to fund one different type of DeFi protocol. So in this particular case, just talking about the Amaru example, this would actually be some kind of a decentralized exchange where you would go and convert your ADA to stable coins. In addition to that, the idea is also to provide this to lending protocols, because just like there are issues on the DEX side of things in terms of like slippage and loss of funds that make it very unappealing for businesses to do business here. In addition to that, there are other DeFi protocols like lending protocols where when you increase the depth of liquidity, it helps to increase the number of people who are able to lend and have like lower interest rates. And obviously that's a double-edged sword, because that also means that people who are providing funds to those markets also have lower interest on the liquidity that they're providing. So there's a bit of a double-edged sword there. But you know, the main goal here is to try and increase the depth of liquidity so that transactions and, you know, use of these protocols is much more attractive.
Yeah, I think this is one of the things that's, I think, easiest to understand, right? The deeper liquidity is sort of this additional grease in the system that makes it run smoother, right? Without it, it sort of works, but it's just a bit more, yeah, it's not as smooth. Let's put it like that, right? So maybe the naive question, right, from someone that is not as involved in DeFi as you are is, If the main goal is to increase the liquidity of a stablecoin pair, wouldn't be the most efficient way to just pick one stablecoin and one massive liquidity pool or one protocol? Why is that maybe not a good idea?
Yeah, so there's two things here. So I think it might be a little bit helpful to talk a little bit about the evolution of the proposal as well, because these are some of the conversations that we had to tackle, to get the current proposal into the form that it's in now. So my the original proposal, and actually I should say I'm not the only one that wrote it. I also actually worked with another person. His name is Marco. He's also very involved in the DeFi ecosystem, but he has a traditional finance job, like heavily regulated. So for a variety of reasons, he did not want to be officially involved in this. Even though I do have a lot of the analytical background, and I've worked with a lot of DEXs and lending protocols and stuff like that, he was actually there to help provide a lot of the kind of like financial expertise as we were crafting this. Anyway, the original idea that we had was to say, okay, we don't want to pick winners and losers. What we want to do is we actually want to just set certain criteria, and the idea would be this would be some kind of an incentive that would say, okay, if we set kind of these benchmarks, like you have to have this certain amount of starting TVL, your DEX has to be in operation for X period of time, et cetera. What that would do is that would actually help to incentivize DEXs in their communities to help try and grow their protocol in such a way where they could meet these criteria, and we could put out we could invest into a variety of DEXs now, or lending protocols. Now, the problem with that is that, and this was pointed out relatively early on, is that really spreads out the liquidity pretty thin across a variety of protocols, to the point of it actually becomes a barrier for people to use this, right? So if you think about 50 million ADA, which, today is, let's say, $12.5 million, right? You split that across, 2 or now maybe 3 different fiat-backed stable coins, and then across, let's say, 8 or 9 different DEXs, you're spreading that out to each DEX is getting, each DEX plus stablecoin combined is getting, less than $1 million into their actual pool, right? And that's, that might be great for some of the numbers for some of these DEXs, but for the traders and the people who are actually trying to do business, it's now a matter of, okay, now all of this liquidity is spread out across everywhere. I have to go to like a DEX aggregator, even to figure out how do I split all of this stuff across all of these different protocols. So that was the original idea. The current form of this is to say, okay, well, if the goal of this is really to try and help increase the liquidity, but not just increase the liquidity, but also to try and make sure that things actually run more smoothly on Cardano, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to be a little bit more judicious about this. Pick 1 or maybe 2 stable coins, pick 1 or maybe 2 different DEXs, and 1 or 2 different lending protocols, and that's it. So that we're not diluting out this liquidity across all of these protocols. Now, you could go with just 1, but from kind of like the operational side of things, there's always the risk of, well, what about security? What happens if there is some kind of a security issue, right? So I know that there's a lot of talk around USDCX. Why don't we just put it all into USDCX, or we just pick all of USDM or USDA, which is not a terrible idea. At the same time, we also need to make sure that we're kind of mitigating some of the potential risks that we have, right? Like if any one of these stable coins, for whatever reason, if it goes out of business, if there is some kind of a hack, if there is, something that happens, if we put all of our eggs into one basket, then it's kind of like that, all of that is gone, right? Same thing with DEXs and lending protocols as well, right? So the way it's written right now, we could go with one. My intuition is that it's probably a good idea to go with two, just to try and help mitigate some of the risks, just in case there is some kind of an issue. But that's just kind of the basic idea of like, why do we go with like two instead of one? Because one would make the most sense in terms of like trying to make things run a little bit more smoothly. But we're also not, even with two, we're not spreading things out so thin so that it's completely ineffective.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and really thanks for sharing that. Right, on one hand, let's say that the most optimal and efficient way would probably be one, but then again, it doesn't consider security, it doesn't consider other risks, right? So I think it's a very sensible approach. And if we're now actually talking about security and all of that, it might be a good segue into talking about the setup also of your fund vehicle or your structure that you want to create, because I think that's also, you have a big focus on transparency and also security, right? I know there's a DAO involved. So maybe you could share a little bit about that as well.
Yeah. So I think the original plan that we had was to do this like very simply with just a simple multi-sig address. And I think it was actually the Cardano Foundation, in discussions with them, specifically Matthias, that really kind of changed my mind on this. Just because there's a lot of operational issues around that, right? And I think one of the things that became very apparent to me is that yes, it is a bigger lift to try and do some kind of a smart contract with this, especially to have community oversight on this with the Treasury DAO. But it's critically important if we want something like this to be sustainable, to like last beyond what myself or anybody else that would be a part of this would be able to do. So the basic idea behind the smart contract is that it works something like a multi-sig wallet, where you still have a certain number of people who are making decisions in terms of where our funds going, et cetera. However, there is also a community oversight component to this. So what I have put in there is I put in there something called the Treasury DAO. And if you want to be a part of the Treasury DAO, anybody can join. The only thing you have to do is to become a DREP. That's it. That's the only requirement. And basically the way that the Treasury DAO works is that they're the ones who are responsible for either voting in or removing members of the multi-sig component, like the people who are making the decisions of where the funds go to. They will also have the capacity to shut the entire contract down. So basically, it's almost kind of like a no confidence vote, where once they enable this, then none of the members of the multi-sig wallet are capable of taking any other actions except for to send the funds that they have in the wallet back to the Treasury, and that's it. So I think that's, in terms of the smart contract component, that is kind of functionally how it works at a very high level overview. There's also some additional, let's call it non-contract components to this that we are imposing on, well, I guess I could say imposing on ourselves, but basically they're basically rules and guidelines that we're going to follow. So one of them is that when we go to deposit any of our funds into any kind of protocol, there's any kind of a liquidity token, we have to actually hold that in the contract itself, rather than actually putting it into a farming contract or anything like that. And the main reason for that is because it allows people to more easily audit what it is that we're doing. So when you're looking at, the actual wallet, you can see, you have liquidity tokens to MinSwap or CSwap or Sunday Swap. and you have liquidity tokens and liquid, right? So it makes it very easy to audit, and it's very easy to kind of track, what are the funds being held by the smart contract. So just very high level overview. That's kind of how it works.
That's great, right? So this Treasury DAO, right, has, I think, 6 different conditions that can be either met or not, right? And then on top of that, you will also create this again, right? Everyone loves beautiful dashboards. Everyone wants to build a dashboard, but it is. I think that's very important. And the only question, or like maybe concern, and maybe something you thought about as well, is if anyone can just review and look at the liquidity position, is that a possibility of arbitrage, or people sort of taking advantage of the? I mean, we want people to take advantage, like, right? It's about deeper liquidity, so of course people will trade more, and it's ideally creating this flywheel of more liquidity means more trading, means more liquidity, and so on. But
so there's so not to get too much into the weeds, but this is something that I have thought about, because one of the things that can happen is that in order for you to have effective arbitrage, you have to have price differences, right? And part of the price difference is always going to be slippage. As you increase the depth of liquidity for a pair, it decreases the effective price range for arbitrage, if that makes sense. So if we were to take just 50 million ADA today and drop it into any of the ADA USDM or USDCX or USDA pools, it would immediately create an arbitrage opportunity. So one of the things that we have done, and one of the linked documents that we have for the current withdrawal action, is that we actually talk about this a little bit in terms of how do we actually go to roll out these funds in a way that is not going to cause these funds to be like arbitrage to the point of, because at the end of the day, these are like, we view these as they're still treasury funds. What we are doing is we are just kind of overseeing them. So, as people who are trying to be good, responsible members of Cardano, what we're going to do as we go to roll out these funds is we're going to take a look at how balanced is the pool to begin with. If we were to put in funds right now, is that going to immediately create arbitrage opportunities? And then on top of that, it's not just taking, this large pot of liquidity and dropping it into a relatively illiquid system. It's rolling it out over time. So it's not just going to be like day one, there's, what we have today, and then tomorrow there's another 12 million in the ecosystem.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, right? It's a gradual rollout. I think that's how you framed it in the documents. And then the other another question for me would also be around, right? You get the ADA from the treasury, ideally, right? And then you sort of need to either deploy directly ADA into whatever protocol you've chosen, or you need to first convert the ADA to fiat-backed stablecoins, right? And how does that work? Is that all with over-the-counter trade channels, or do you want to work? Are you working directly with the builders and the teams behind these stablecoins, like Moneta or Ansens with USDA? How does that work?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So yeah, because the ecosystem is relatively illiquid, there is not enough stable coins on Cardano today for us to just like try to trade in ADA for stable coins and then try and deploy it into the ecosystem. So we will have to use OTC desks. So that will come in the next phase of the proposal. We have made contact with, or we have been talking to both USDM and USDA to see what that would look like. Nothing concrete. I'm a very big fan about being open about all of this. So there's nothing concrete, but just kind of making sure that if we were to come with them and say, hey, we need some kind of an OTC desk for this. how do we go about, how would we go about doing this when we are ready? So there will be like an RFP. As of right now, in the original info action, the idea was to have an RFP process. I'm not entirely certain that we would want to go through that RFP process, just kind of based on how those conversations have gone. I think there's pretty clear channels in terms of like how to go about doing this with OTC desks for businesses that actually do business with Cardano already. So I think what it would most likely look like would be just kind of us broadcasting, like once we're further down the road in those conversations, just kind of broadcasting this to the community, just to make sure that we have good feedback on it before saying, yes, we are certainly going to go this route.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, right? And also remaining somewhat flexible is important in these scenarios, because I mean, it's the first time someone attempts doing something like that, right? With the Cardano treasury and for the Cardano treasury. And that's something I believe we have not really touched on, right? So it's not just that funding is taken out of the treasury and then it's just benefiting DeFi, but there's a component of how it also makes the Cardano treasury more sustainable, or that's at least the one of the aspirations or the goals, right? So
yeah, exactly. So I mean, I think there's a couple of different things and a couple of different points here. So first of all, there's always, especially in crypto, there's kind of like a first movement risk to putting funds into some kind of a DeFi system, right? And we've already kind of talked about it, right? Like if we were to just drop a big pot of money into one of our DeFi protocols, there's some risks involved in that. One of the ideas behind this is that, because the treasury funds are the ecosystem funds, it makes sense that, the treasury can take on some of that risk as long as we're doing it responsibly and making sure that we're getting plenty of feedback from the community and we're making sure that this is done in a well thought out way. However, in addition to that, as you pointed out, even though the main purpose of this is to increase the liquidity in the ecosystem so that we're kind of greasing the wheels, there's also another component to this where as people use it, we're gaining interest on it. And we can actually take that interest and send it back to the treasury to try and help make the treasury more sustainable. So in our proposal, I think we have what I would consider to be relatively, modest targets in terms of like what it is we're looking for in terms of targets for growth, because the main point of this is not growth. The main point of this is, increasing the liquidity in the ecosystem. But the basic idea is, or the basic target that we have is 3 to 5%. I think I had 4% exactly in the proposal. But it's by DeFi standards, I would say that they're relatively modest. I think most people are probably looking at some of these other platforms across like Ethereum, and you can see that you can make 10 or 20%. I think 3 to 5%, especially understanding the risks in the current state of the ecosystem. I think 3 to 5% makes a lot of sense, and that's helping to grow our treasury, which as of right now is not growing at all. It's relatively static. And I don't think I need to go into that too much, because I think Charles has kind of, said a lot about that. And I think that's a pretty well-known problem at this point. But yeah, as you said, one of the additional advantages to this is actually making sure that, the treasury is actually having some kind of a revenue stream.
Thanks. Yeah, that I think that's so important. And then regarding the rebalancing of the different positions and the different different positions, would that happen on a monthly basis, or are you gonna look at that in a different time scale?
Yeah, I think we look at it on a monthly basis, but in terms of how the rebalancing happens, I think that's something that we would have to it's easy to come up with a single rule that we're going to rebalance every single month. But, if for whatever reason, ADA does like 10x or something like that, I think we're going to have a different rebalancing strategy than if, it increases by 10 or 20%, right? So I think, being able to rebalance for smaller price movements, I think, there's a pretty clear strategy for it. But for larger price movements, I think that's something that, and who knows, right? I mean, sometimes, things will change by a matter of like 10x in the course of 24 hours. And then what do, right? I think what you do in that case, most likely is just do some kind of like time delayed rebalance, where you rebalance it a portion at a time until you fall back into the range that we have for the liquidity budget.
Yeah, these unforeseen circumstances, right? It's
Exactly.
just something you can never be ready for, but you can plan, right? And
that's actually that's actually part of the reason why it's important to have kind of a mixture of people on the committee. Not that we're kind of jumping into that, but just in terms of like making sure that we have like some what I would consider to be more technical people, meaning the people who kind of have an idea of how the nuts and bolts of how this works, along with people who have a background in finance. That kind of stuff, so that when you have kind of this mixture of experience, you're able to tackle a lot of these things that come up.
Yeah, and I mean, right now you have a governance action on chain, right? It's the first one of the two, the treasury withdrawals. I just looked at it now today on March 24th. It stands at 33% DREP approval. There's still 16 days left, so a bit more than halfway through the governance action lifetime. Yeah, but proposal one, treasury withdrawal one, that is about setting up also the legal structure. And I think that's something we've not yet touched on. Well, it is maybe for some really exciting if you have a legal background. For others, it might be more interesting to hear about the different positions and how you think about that. But I think it's important to talk about this very solid structure that you've built up, and maybe also address, I saw some of the concerns in the rationales or on X. For someone that is not involved, it seems like that the costs are quite high, but others are saying it's very normal for this kind of setup. So yeah, please just take it from there.
Yeah. So I this is another one of those situations where it's evolved pretty significantly between like what we currently have now versus what the original proposal was. The original proposal really did not have much of anything for a legal structure in it. And honestly, there's a few voices in the ecosystem which I agree with to a certain extent, where it's like, listen, are we going to be doing decentralized governance and decentralized finance, or are we not? Right. And their claim is that, if we're doing this like truly decentralized, there are no owners. There is no there's no real recourse, legal recourse, because there's no real boundaries in terms of like laws or, different countries and so on and so forth. However, there's also kind of the reality of the situation. And I think when you're taking a look at this, I think there's a variety of things that you should look at in terms of, and we're just talking about, should we even have a legal structure or not? And the main reason why, I kind of fell on the side of, yeah, we do need to have a legal structure is for a few different scenarios that I came across when thinking through this. So one is, as much as we would like to be a fully decentralized financial system, the reality of the situation is we still need to rely on, TradFi, right? Like we still have to do business with the outside world. The entire world is not on crypto yet. So there's still kind of this bridge that we have to pass over. And even in that situation, it's a matter of if we're talking OTC desks, if I give an OTC desk 50 million ADA and they just decide, well, who are you to be able to sue me? You don't even have a legal structure. How are you going to have legal standing in court, right? that creates a really big risk for the treasury, right? Now, realistically speaking, a lot of these places are large enough where I don't know that they would want to take on the reputational risk of doing something like that, especially for a top 10 blockchain. But I think that is just kind of like one of the scenarios in terms of we do actually need to have some kind of a legal structure here in order to protect the treasury funds while we're trying to get this, at a minimum, while we're trying to get this launched. So that's one of the components to it. Another component to this is that we need to have protections for both the people who are making the decisions in terms of, and when I say protections for people making the decisions, I'll get into that, not from the community, rather for other reasons. But we also need to have protections for anybody that's going to have any kind of interaction with the smart contract mechanism that we're going to use. So just to give an example, there's been multiple lawsuits, especially in the United States. And again, I'm using the United States because that's where I'm at, where individuals have sued individual members of a DAO as a part of something called a general partnership. That basically means like if you and me are in a business and we don't have any kind of legal structure to define exactly what our relationship is, that falls under something called a general partnership, which is something that's recognized pretty internationally. And the problem with that is that if either of us do something and we are a part of a general partnership, then either of us can get sued in any of the jurisdictions in which we are a part of. And this has happened in a few different DAOs where there's been a DAO where some of the people feel like a particular like DeFi protocol had rugged, or there was a hack or something. There was a DAO that was officially the owner of it, but in some places like California, where some of the DAO members resided, some lawsuits were brought against them because they were considered a general partnership without having this legal structure in place. So again, just trying to tread, somewhat lightly here, because DREPs are actually going to have some kind of involvement in this. The purpose of the legal structure is to try and help protect them, at least in part, from those kinds of issues. Because if you're a DREP and you're trying to do your best for Cardano, and now all of a sudden you're getting, sued by somebody in the United States for, some kind of a decision that was made as a part of this program, I don't know that we're necessarily doing good for the ecosystem if any member of our kind of governing community can be sued like that. So that's one of the reasons. And then also on the other side, very similar reason, members of the committee. So there have been some threats of lawsuits that I have come across, and just in terms of like, we feel like, this, if you do not select X protocol, then we see that, you are picking winners and losers. And, there's been some threats of lawsuits over grievances and stuff like that. And it's like, listen, if they want to sue like this legal entity we'll set up, that's perfectly fine. But like, I don't want any member of the committee, as they're going to take this on, to think that they are going to be personally liable for something like that. Right. So that's kind of the big picture, background behind the legal entity.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me, right? I mean, not just to protect the committee, but also to have this, let's say, this legal counterparty, right, where you can actually enter into, proper negotiations and enforce contracts. Because if you want to do these OTC deals, I guess it will also be necessary that you are a regulated KYC AML institution that can participate. Otherwise, it's again you're limited, right? With what you can do, and if you don't want to take on. I guess nobody wants to take on all of this risk personally. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So this is what the current treasury withdrawal that's currently on chain is about, right? I think it's 800,000 data.
Yes. So part of it is to set up that legal structure. There's also another part of it to pay for the a smart contract audit. So as of right now, Lucas and Casey from UTXO company are working on building out the smart contract, and then also Hinson from Sidon Labs is working on building out the front end to do the smart contract interactions. So they have offered to do this for the community for free. So I think, anybody who has, if you see those guys, give them a big thank you, because that really helped to cut out some of the costs. And it's also really kind of a privilege to have, some of the leading devs in the ecosystem, contributing to this. And I think this is one of the things that really makes Cardano great. It's also one of the things that's probably going to, that will help to make this successful. In addition to that, though, part of what this withdrawal is going to pay for is the actual smart contract audit on this as well.
That's awesome. I didn't even know that. Yep. Yeah, I mean, that UTXO company and also Sidon Labs is working on that. It's great to hear, right? And it shows, while this proposal has now been going on for a year, or the discussions, right? Let's start there. It's not a sprint, right? It's a marathon, and I feel like you're now already in such a state that I'm really excited about this proposal.
I really am too, and it's definitely taken some time to get people in Cardano. I don't want to say on board. I think that's kind of that's a bad way of framing it. I think one of the things that's very nice about Cardano is that people think about things really well. I mean, obviously, we do have meme coins just like other ecosystems and stuff like that. But people are very thoughtful on Cardano, and they definitely bring the hard questions that need to be asked. And as I've already mentioned multiple times here, like, I had something that I started with, and it's really been kind of beaten up quite a bit, and it's shifted quite a bit. And it's largely because of a lot of the good feedback that I've had from people in the ecosystem. So, but yeah, it's definitely been a marathon. I do think I am also very excited for this as well, because I think this is going to be one of the things, not the only thing. I think there's other things that we have to tackle, but one of the things that kind of helps set Cardano up to be more successful and more attractive for businesses coming into the ecosystem.
Yeah, well said. This is right about the sustainability, not just of the treasury, but the ecosystem. And I see it sort of all coming together this year, right? With the Penta integrations, the stablecoin DeFi liquidity budget, boosting that flywheel, or adding some more motion to that flywheel, and then
the Draper U stuff with Orion. I mean, that's another really great initiative.
Exactly. And now, right, because I'm also, of course, highly involved in Cardano governance, not just because of my title, but because of what I'm doing. I also want to ask you, because you've engaged now in Cardano governance for more than a year. And I also want to hear from your perspective of maybe let's start with the positives first. What was the most beneficial thing for you with Cardano governance, and what was the most, maybe not frustrating, but where do you see the most possibilities for improvement? Let's phrase it positively.
So on the positive side, I think there was this idea in Cardano that governance, we are going to solve the problem of governance, and it's not going to be terrible like it is in everyday politics in every other country on the face of the earth. And I think the reality of the situation that we have kind of seen is that governance is actually pretty messy. That being said, I think that there is a certain love-hate relationship that I had for the info action process. I think it was well thought out. And in retrospect, I think, the current proposal that I have would not have as good of a prospect now if it did not go through the info action process. Like if it had started with the withdrawal, I don't think that it would be as well developed as having gone through the info action process. So that's one thing that I would say. I think I'll probably get a little bit of hate for saying that, there's a part of the info action that I think was a really, really good idea. And I think there's going to be something that we're going to be missing a little bit moving forward by not having that, even though I do think that it was probably the right decision to remove it and just go straight to withdrawal actions. I also do think that Intersect's role in the governance process has really been, again, I'll probably get a little bit of hate for this as well. I think it was a really good thing to have like a specific entity in the ecosystem to try and help coordinate a lot of this stuff, because it is a lot, right? Like having gone through this myself, I don't want to say by myself because I've definitely had a lot of help along the way, but really trying to like build up this thing from the ground up, without the support of Intersect, I definitely see where there's a lot of problems in terms of trying to get this going alone. So in terms of positives, I would say, info actions with an asterisk, and then, Intersect, I think the stuff that they're doing is actually pretty good as well. Room for improvement, I think communication is still kind of a really big problem in the governance process. And I think I'm saying it as vaguely as communication, just because I think there's a number of issues related to communication that are a problem. So some of it has to come, some of that communication issue is just around the new constitution and like the entire development process for that. Like, I don't want to criticize anybody for putting together the new constitution, because that was a monumental effort. And I think that, these people that are doing these things are dedicating their time to doing it. But I think there's a lot of issues with the current constitution, right? And I think if I remember correctly, I think yourself and a number of other people are maybe, talking about, some of these issues and working through them. So I think that's probably a good effort. But also just around the communication side of things, I think there's also been a lot of issues just in the transition from the old constitution to the new constitution, because the current constitution is so vague about a number of things. I think, having more definitive statements when we do have these new constitutions come through, having more definitive statements from our constitutional committee members so that, they can help remove some of the ambiguity would be helpful. And, when I've kind of mentioned these things in public, there's been some pushback where it's kind of like, well, I'm not obligated to, make some kind of a public statement on it, which, hey, fair enough. But at the same time, like for me as a proposer, it's like, I'm spending my time trying to like take a shot in the dark as to how you're going to vote on this. Can you at least give me some kind of indication so that I don't have 100,000 ADA tied up in a governance action for a month, right? Even just a little bit of feedback would be helpful. And I mean, I would say most of the constitutional committee members have actually been very understanding of that. And they have responded to some of my requests for that kind of stuff. So I think, it's just kind of there's a bit of a learning process still. So.
No, I couldn't agree more with you. I mean, especially when it comes around when you talked about the whole thing with the benefits of the info action, right? On one hand, I feel like the way we approached that with budgets, right, was always not how it was intended to be used, because we ended up basically voting on the same thing twice. Whereas yes, the initial idea of the budget info actions was rather to have this rough drafts sort of allocation of specific funding amounts for a specific topic, right? So for example, DeFi, we would allocate, 50 million, and then a budget is approved, and then you would have the different withdrawals underneath that. But I mean, right, this is something we only saw in production, right? Once the governance model was live, how it is being used. And updating it is, as you said, right, this is where your proposal with the first withdrawal sort of was crushed between the Constitution 2.4 and the old Constitution, which was unfortunate a bit, right? But yeah, this is I couldn't agree more.
And I mean, I complained about that for sure. But like at the same time, that was, I don't know, I think that's, I would chalk that up to, I hope as a lesson learned where moving forward that there's, some component in constitutions moving forward about what do you do with live proposals that, are also on chain with this stuff, right?
I can clauses. Exactly. Yeah, I can see that as maybe one of the first constitutional amendments that's coming with the next one. But one thing also I want to quickly, if we go back to the withdrawal and the whole proposal, right? So let's assume the happy path, right? The treasury withdrawal is approved in 14 days or something, and then what are the next steps? How does it continue?
Yeah, so basically it is the next step would be the second withdrawal. So so for the very first thing is we're currently trying to coordinate with the legal firm so that as soon as we get funds, they can start work on things, and then we can try and move this process along as quickly as possible. So it seems like it will be somewhere on the order of 4 to 6 weeks to have like the full legal entity along with any other kind of like legal work that needs to be done completed. And then for the smart contract, basically as soon as the smart contract is ready to go, I think we're going to try to submit the second withdrawal action. And then we are also in the process of finalizing an RFP for protocols that want to apply for funds. That should be released on April 1st. So that's coming up pretty quickly in the next week and a half. So that'll be out before the withdrawal action is even done, because we want to get the ball moving on this as quickly as possible. So those are next steps.
That's fantastic. And then this basically the RFP that's going to roll out, that will include clear requirements of what the protocol, what boxes it must tick or what features it must have, I guess.
Correct. Yes. Yep. It does. So I think one of the criticisms of the current or what we have been putting out so far is that some of the evaluation criteria that we have is like, we want, I think I called it DeFi ethos, meaning, making sure that people are really committing to being open and transparent about their smart contracts, about the way their protocols operate. Are they using decentralized batchers or centralized batchers, or is their code open source? Has it been audited, et cetera? So one of the criticisms that we've had is that we haven't really put kind of like numbers or weights associated with a lot of these things. So I think my general pushback, having been in academics and also kind of the professional world and seeing how these things play out in practice, is that, you can put weights on these things, but at the end of the day, people will try and game the system however it is that they can. But even so, I think it's still, it's a good exercise just to give people an indication of like, where are we actually putting like heavier priorities? Because there's certain things where it's like, okay, security has to be the number one priority, right? Like if we're trying to protect treasury funds here, security has to be the number one thing. If there's a major security violation or your contracts are closed source and they've never been audited, that's going to be a really huge red flag as an example, right? So.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I can't wait to study these requirements. I mean, I'm not running a DeFi protocol, but I always like to be involved when it comes to things like that. So yeah, I mean, one thing that's always important to me in these kind of videos and live streams is to remind everyone that is a DREP to go out and vote, right? Not just on the DeFi liquidity budget, treasury withdrawal, but all the other live governance actions. Cardano governance depends on active participation. So go out there, vote, or ask your DREP to vote. Maybe check on them if they're inactive.
And I would also say the sooner you vote on a withdrawal action, the sooner we can get started. So, from the moment we launched, if we had cleared all the constitutional committee requirements and the DREP requirements, we could have had the withdrawal, within 5 days or so, right? And then that would have allowed us to have been moving already. So I think, one of the things that we've seen in the governance area on Cardano is that people tend to wait till the last minute, which is okay for info actions because they're going to last as long as they last, right? But when it comes to withdrawal actions, if the community is a little more proactive about their voting, that allows us to move more quickly.
I agree, right? And it's the thing that, especially for proposals that have been already previously announced, right, where there was off-chain discussions or socialization. I know some people don't like this word anymore, but right, then people can vote quicker. But if a proposal comes up for the first time and you see it in the Explorer, you might need some time to review it. But yeah, so this is
right,
as with everything, right? It's an infinite gray zone.
Yes. Yep. Exactly.
All right. Good. That actually already brings us to the end of this governance hour. I again just want to, first of all, thank Dr. Nick Schaub for participating today and sharing with us more about the DeFi liquidity budget, and also say thank you that he's taking on this really immense task of deploying and potentially deploying liquidity from the Cardano treasury into our DeFi ecosystem, of course, with all of the team that's involved. But it's just, really, really great to see. And to everyone that is watching, thank you for tuning in today. And if you could leave a like, a comment, or subscribe, that would be fantastic. So more people can learn about governance, can learn about this proposal. And with that, I just want to say, have a great day, everyone. See you next time.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Bye.
Bye-bye.